How's your day been?
It's been a busy day, you know. I spent some time, as I told you, over at my house. You know, we've had some issues going on as we do some reconstruction. So I've been over there doing that today, and I'll be there again tomorrow. So,
How's the process been coming along?
listen, the process on reconstruction of a house is all those things stressful, can be annoying, but we've got our eye on the prize, and the prize is to get it done. So this is the stuff you have to go through to get to the end result.
I'm sure you guys will get there in a timely manner.
We're going to get there. I'm certain of that too.
And before we get deep into conversation, can you tell me who you are and what do you do?
Yeah. Well, my name is Michael Hyman. What do I do? Man, that's an interesting question because I do a lot of different things, and love being involved. So with the Stanford community, I am first and foremost a man of God, and so my church and my religion and faith is important to me. I've spent time as an educator here in Stanford. I've been a community activist and still am an advocate, if you will. So, and recently elected last year to the Board of Education.
Congratulations for that.
I appreciate that. And I also, appreciate all of the help that I got from a lot of different people. Yours truly being one of those examples. So that was just really important that people came out and helped.
So you said you're a man of God. You were an educator, and you ran for the Board of Ed. Which came first, like being a man of God? Because what I do tell people is I always speak to a reference, right? Mm-hmm. And what I did learn was that you're a minister, or we're a minister, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, you never were. I am.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's something I learned today. So thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Again, my faith is important to me. It has been for many years, since I was a kid. And I think that it became important to me because it became a part of who I was. First and foremost, just the idea of what it meant to my family as a child, and to my community. And those things always seem to just fit together seamlessly. So the pastor at my church was someone who understood that you can't just be concerned about the afterlife for people. In the sweet by and by, everything is going to be okay. He was also concerned about those things that were happening to our people on a day-to-day basis. And that made a huge impression upon me, was that here was somebody who understood what people now call a liberation gospel, the idea that Black people want to be free, and that there are things that justice called for. And so those things were intertwined in my faith and my church and activism since I was a kid.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in a place called Florence, South Carolina. It is now considered a metropolitan area, believe it or not. When I was born there were about 22,000 people in the town. It was very much, when I was born there in the 50s, it was very much the same place. If somebody came and landed there from the 1900s, it would have been very much the same way. I was born in a house where we didn't have electricity, we didn't have heat, we didn't have bathroom. So it was, so no lights, no heat, no bathroom.
That's making do.
Yeah. And the thing is that we weren't the only ones. There were other people in my town who were exactly like us. And so I was born in a shotgun house.
And,
Yeah.
and I'm assuming these people in this community made up your church?
Oh, yeah. But, everybody wasn't from a shotgun house,
Yeah.
In our neighborhood, it's all segregated, obviously. All the black people lived on one side of town. But you had people who were teachers and preachers and clerks at stores or something like that. So there was barbers. We had our own taxi cab companies, So there was a community.
So, and that's what you saw growing up.
Yeah.
So how do you think that affected your perspective of what you were going to be?
Well, man, that's a tough one, simply because there was so much love in my community. I didn't understand that we were poor. That was just the way things were. It was normal and natural. People talk about organic food. Well, we grew most of the stuff that we ate right there, where I lived, right behind the house. We had a whole bunch of land, and we were dirt poor, but we grew, all of our food, most of our food, right there.
The freedom and self-sufficiency, right?
Yeah. So when I looked at that and said, hey, wait a minute, once you realize that you were poor, and how I realized that was actually getting a chance to see some other places, an opportunity to go somewhere else and to see something else. But through books, learning how to read, and that being an important avenue to understanding what the rest of the world was like, and understanding that we were, held in a particular place. I remember with my grandfather once going to a gas station, and there was a young man who spoke to him, a young white man, boy really, who spoke to him in a way that was too familiar and didn't show him the proper respect. I was a kid, but I realized that here was this boy talking to my grandfather like they were equals. and then, waiting on him, but then a white customer came up and he stopped waiting on him and went to somebody else. Those types of things, realizing my grandfather took me to pick my mother up from the bus station where she worked behind the lunch counter. And I went in and sat on one of the stools. You're a little kid. You always want to go sit on the stools and turn around on the stool. And I sat at the wrong place at the counter. Black people or colored people were supposed to sit at one side and white people at the other side. And I went and sat on a spot that was reserved for white people. And my grandfather did not come to get me, but one of my mother's friends who worked at the bus station, she saw what had happened. The white people saw what happened. The black people saw what happened. And she said, hey, Michael, come on down here. I got something special for you. And so she enticed me to come down, but that enticement was to make sure that there was no trouble.
And at what point in your life did you reflect and realize that?
There were various things. I started to add up stuff, right? But the eye-opener for me was having a family trip. My grandmother's sister lived in Mount Clemens, Michigan, which was north of Detroit. And we took the Greyhound bus to go visit with her. This was our summer vacation, if you will, And as a little kid, we go up, we get on the bus. And, of course, I'm a kid. You want to go sit in the front of the bus so you can see everything. And my mother told me, no, you can't. No, she just, let's go back here. She didn't tell me we couldn't, but she just went all the way to the back.
Yeah.
And she and my sister and I sat on the back bench of the bus right where there's a doorway for the bathroom there and the 3 seats, and we sat there. We were very comfortable there. But it wasn't until we got to Ohio that we changed buses and we had a chance to go up a little bit in the front of the bus. I didn't know, she never said, we can't sit up here. But I saw all of the colored people were sitting in the back of the bus and all the white people were sitting in the front. And then getting to Detroit and having a chance where there just seemed to be freedom. I saw white people and black people in the same spaces on an equal basis. And so as a kid, I saw that.
And how old were you at that time?
At that point, I was a third grader.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a third grader. And I saw that. And I said, wow, I could see the difference. My grandmother's sister in Mount Clemens lived in this big house that was next door to what people call old folks' home back then. It was a nursing home. A lot of old people lived in there, but that's what they call it. It was an old folks' home. And so there were black nurses at this place taking care of white people, a lot of old white people, and they sat in these rocking chairs on the porches and stuff. And the nurses were constantly trying to tell us as kids, you have to be quiet. The old people need you to be quiet, because that's what they thought old people needed. My birthday happened, and my mother had a party for me and other kids who were from the church that my aunt went to in Mount Clemens. And so they were in the back. We were in the backyard. It's a birthday party. We were having a great time, yelling and screaming and doing what third graders and little kids do. And so one of the nurses came over and said, you all are really being too noisy. You have to, hold it down. Well, kids can't hold it down. And so just at that point where we were sitting at the table about to have some of the cake, through these hedges, these large hedges, came this white hand. There's this long white hand sticking out, right? This person had in his hand a sailor's hat or a captain's hat that he made out of newspaper. This man had made me, the birthday boy, a hat out of newspaper. So I went over to get it. I put it on. The next thing you know, all of the old people, all the old white people next door were making hats out of newspapers for all of my guests. And so we invited them to come over. So here I was, a little black kid, all these little black friends, and all these old white people in wheelchairs or these rocking chair things in the backyard. It just showed you how people thought, oh, old people just want to be quiet, don't cause any noise. And that was an eye-opener for me, because that was the very first time a white person that I knew of had been genuinely nice to me. And I saw that whatever was going on in South Carolina, when I came back home, the rudeness, the gruffness, those feelings that they were having, they were showing, it didn't have to be that way. Huh. So that's when my eyes were starting to open, was with that. The fact that I told you I love to read. I read all the time. But not being able to go to the county library in my hometown. So my parents, my mother, on a subscription plan, purchased for me Compton's encyclopedias so that I would always have something at home that I could do my homework with. And when I say subscription, she was paying on it every week.
Just to make sure you had access.
Think about that. It was just a couple of years before that we actually got electricity at our house. Okay? But here she was paying for encyclopedias for me. So I look at that type of someone making an investment.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
In their child and saying, this could be okay. You've got to believe that you can be more than just this.
So you had seeing all that and gaining all that perspective at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how somebody can give back, and so how can I say, inspire a community to come together and stay together.
Mm-hmm.
What point did you decide that you wanted to be an educator?
Well, I didn't, that came years later, but I was always inspired by good educators. All of my teachers, when I've met students in northern places over time, and hearing people who are from my generation talk about what their education was like in Stanford, mine was not like that at all. Every teacher that I had from kindergarten through sixth grade was black.
That's
Every
in South Carolina.
in South Carolina. Well, we were segregated,
Yeah.
right? But every teacher that I had, and they were of the highest quality, there was something about a teacher who demanded the best of you in that place, who said to you, listen, you if you don't know how to do it, we're going to sit here until you learn. Okay? I'm going to go over it with you, but you're expected to do your homework. You're expected to participate in class. I know your mother, and I know your father, and I know everybody in your family. In fact, my mother's first grade teacher was my first grade teacher.
That's powerful.
Yeah. My Sunday school teacher in fifth grade was, my Sunday school teacher at my church was my fifth grade teacher. My first grade teacher I did not know, but she lived next door to me. I mean, I knew her as the woman who lived next door with her elderly mother there. But this person would have me come over as a little kid, and we get in her hammock, and she'd feed me cucumbers and tomatoes and salt, and she would read to me. So the first day I appeared for first grade, they opened the door, and I see my neighbor in there. And you imagine as a kid, you see your neighbor in there. The first words I spoke was, "What are you doing here?"
That's really community.
Yeah.
That's really community.
But that was just with that type of community, which was so important. And there were people who were educating me all along the way, and I just sucked it in. The mailman who delivered mail to our house, he drove by one day and he said, "Hey, Michael, I got something for you." And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, you're going to be here tomorrow." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'll bring it by tomorrow." So he was also a trustee at the church that I attended. But he comes back the next day doing his mail route, and he had a Boy Scout book, a Boy Scout manual. And he said, "Meet me at the church next Tuesday at 4:00. And I became a Boy Scout. But here was somebody who was important in my life. In that, I also met a gentleman who helped to found the Boys Club. It wasn't Boys and Girls Club. It was the Boys Club at that time. And they found it over a pool hall, right? Upstairs from the pool hall, they started a Boys Club. And then there was the pastor of my church who had been very good friends with Dr. King and knew him quite well. They were, extremely close. And so you can see, I looked at those men and saw what they were doing, and they just opened up in me that desire to, I guess imitation is one of the greatest things of flattery. There was something about each of them that caused me to want to be involved, to give more of myself, and to expect more of myself because of what they believed that I could do.
I love that. And I think it's also acknowledging that so many people invested in you.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
You realize the impact that can have.
Yeah.
But you said you guys were segregated at that time, right?
Yeah.
So there's something that I learned listening to a podcast that had a
Mm-hmm.
speech of Linda Brown that she
Of
was
who?
giving. Linda Brown
Linda Brown. Okay.
that she was giving at a university.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask, like, how did desegregation affect your neighborhood
Mm.
or your town? Because something specifically that she said was like how you said, like, when you grew up in your town, like, you had all these people that were of color, I assume, right?
Mm-hmm.
That held these positions and were able to congregate. They were your teachers, and not for nothing, but when there's a different level of investment you have when you're educating the child or the last person that you educated. You know, like, feel like you're really invested regardless of the color. You know, what Linda Brown touched on was that, like, desegregation, a big issue was that a lot of educators of color lost their jobs when the real issue that they wanted to address was the lack of resources.
That's right.
It's like,
It's absolutely right. And I think that foolishly, some people believed. I mean, during the 1960s, there were 50s and 60s, there were people who believed, white people who believed that black people just simply wanted to be next to them in their company. That wasn't it. That was never it. It was about the resources. It was about the resources. Yeah. It wasn't, anything. You all want us to love you. Well, there was a thing that you said that you can't write any laws to make somebody love somebody. I didn't want that love. I wanted, you had playgrounds for the kids. You had swimming pools that were available to them. You had better books that were being replenished as needed in those places, right? I wanted those resources. I understood that. It wasn't about being next to be in a classroom with white kids. Interesting. But that wasn't it. The kids I was in class with, little black boys and little black girls, wanted to learn and were just as academically inclined as the little white boys and little white girls that I sat next to later on. But the power of this, for me, what I saw was a community that said, we're who we are, and we're proud of that. We may not have as much as anybody else does, but what we do have, we're going to make the most out of it. That's what I learned. And also realizing that I lived in a community that came together. So an example of that being that while we were, my first 6 grades were in a black school, all black school, not one white person in the place. Principal, secretaries in the office,
top to bottom,
the custodian, the lunch ladies, everybody. The kids who, and when I say the kids who drove the buses, because we actually had teenage bus drivers, because South Carolina law allowed that. You were 16 and you drive the bus.
Oh, everybody.
And so these kids drove the bus to school, and then drove the bus back home. So you knew where all the school buses weren't at a school bus yard. They were in the yard of the kid who drove the bus.
Talking about having a purpose.
Yeah. So you knew, and usually they chose a kid who was mechanically inclined just in case something happened to the bus. Mm-hmm. But those kids were well respected. They had a job. Their job was to get people to stop and pick people up and get them to school on time. And they did, responsibility breeds more responsibility. Yeah. And so we missed some of that stuff. But what I wanted to tell you is that in the 6th grade, I did something. And it was because I knew that I could. Brown versus the Board of Education had happened in the 1950s, which schools were to be desegregated. And the Supreme Court said that desegregation should happen with all deliberate speed. And so when somebody says all deliberate speed, that, you think that means get moving. Let's do this, right? But here we were in the 60s, and what it was all deliberate foot dragging. The southern states just simply dragged their feet and wouldn't let it happen. So the schools in Florence were still still segregated. And so Southern senators came up with this idea of saying, okay, the courts are bothering us, the federal government is bothering us. And so we came up with this compromise. And the compromise was freedom of choice schools. And freedom of choice schools meant that any child, any parent, not child, but any parent could make a decision in a school district to say, I want my child to go to that school. So colored, as we were called back then, colored parents could decide that I want my child to go to that white school. And equally, white parents could decide, I want my child to go to that colored school. Knowing full well that most people would not make those choices.
Yeah.
So it was a fool's choice, right? Nobody's going to make the choice.
Like, who's going to be first?
Yeah. So it's just like, we know that, the maid who works in this white woman's house the black maid is not going to select to have her child go over to the white school because everybody is a small town. Everybody's going to know about it. You jeopardize something. What happened was that I decided in the sixth grade that when they passed out the form, Mrs. Cooper, my sixth grade teacher, said, passed out the freedom of choice form to all of the students and said, take these home to your parents and let them see it and then and bring it back in tomorrow. So I read it. I saw it. I took it home. I didn't show it to anybody. But little Michael Hyman decided, I'm going to write their name on here to say that I'm going to the white school.
That boy's going to get those resources.
That's right. So I brought the form back the next day. Mrs. Cooper collected all 30 of the forms she had, and then she saw mine, and she was like, oh. So she called me over a little bit later, and she said, we're really proud of what you're going to be doing, and so, whatever. That was the last I heard of it, okay? And so during the summer, we had the chance when parents were supposed to go to the schools with their child and pick up their books. We rented books, and you cover them with brown paper bags and made the cover so you wouldn't mess up your books. And all of my friends had gotten their letters on my street to go to the school and pick up their books. And my grandmother was saying, well, why haven't we gotten your letter? We need to go to the school to get your books? Well, we realized that, oh, man, that paper I signed back then, we're not going to get a letter from the school to say, come pick up your books. Mm-hmm. What we did get was a telephone call and we didn't have a phone. It came to my grandmother's other sister's house, and it said that the pastor of the church had invited us to come to a meeting that night at the church. My grandmother was thinking, well, why is he inviting me? So we go up to the church and said, bring Michael, and I come too. We go up to the church. We get there, and in the parking lot are the cars of the people who own the taxi company, the black people who own the taxi company, some of the teachers, and the mailman, and all of the black people who were middle class and had a little bit of money. We walked up to the church. They drove. We got there, and my grandmother was like, not knowing, they were very nice to us. And then they started to explain that there were about 13 of us who were going to be desegregating the school. And my grandmother never let on that she did not know and that she had not signed the form. But she was the only maid in the room. The other people own their own businesses or pastor of the church or whatever, school teachers or whatever. And when we left for that walk back home, she said, you know what you did, right? Yeah. And so I was punished for that. And back then, people did corporal punishment. All right. So I got corporal punishment. So for people who don't know what that means, it's like somebody take off the belt.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm
Right?
not too far removed. I think it
Right.
was just right after our generation where,
Yeah.
God bless.
But it wasn't abuse. It was not abuse. This was love, right? And I was getting correction. You know what I mean? This was correction, right? And I got correction, and I understood why I was being corrected, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of my family and everybody in my neighborhood, the word spread. They knew, and they all supported me. They all supported me, and they all knew, okay, you're going to be going down to that white school, and we're proud of you, and we know, because remember, this was during the 60s, when people were getting killed for stuff like this. So here again was a community coming together to say, all of those kids who are going to this particular school, we're behind you.
But did that feeling and the weight of everything settle into you at that moment? Or did you really understand the breadth of what was going on?
Oh, I understood. I understood. I mean, listen, a couple of years before, Viola Louisa was killed. Medgar Evers had been murdered. Yeah, I clearly understood what this meant. It was like, you have to stand up. Somebody has to stand up. And I had seen in my hometown, Black people, we had the folk who sat in at the Woolworths and at the Kresge or Crest store at the lunch counters, and they closed the places down. We had things like that. My hometown was this place where there's an artist by the name of William Johnson. He's gone now, but an internationally known artist. He's from Florence, South Carolina, and he a lot of WPA work, beautiful pictures. You would think of in the same vein Jacob Lawrence and those types of.
I'm not too familiar.
Okay, well, you have seen their work before. The stuff from the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
All these colorful pictures of Black people. So William Johnson was from Florence, South Carolina. He was a fantastic painter. And our city invited him back in the 1950s to give him a certificate. And when they gave him the certificate, of honoring him, they thought they were honoring him. The very next day, he was out with his artist's work board up, and he was painting. And a policeman came by and told him he couldn't paint that building. And he said, why? It was just a hotel. I told him he couldn't paint it because that was a white hotel. And I don't mean the color of the building. That hotel was for white people. You're colored, and you can't be painting that. He just received...
After just being honored.
That's right. He left Florence, and he never came back. I tell you this story because this particular man, people in our town and in our state, did not recognize him for decades. I first truly learned about him from a curator of the African Museum in Paris. I was on a flight from Seattle back to New York, and this man, we struck up a conversation. And when he heard that I was from Florence, he couldn't stop talking about William Johnson because they were displaying his work in Paris.
Wow.
Okay. And so one of the largest single collections owned by the Smithsonian Museum today is of works by William Johnson. But here in my hometown, we didn't talk about it. We didn't know about it. Nobody talked about it. The interesting thing here is that the revitalization of our downtown in Florence, which, really went through a major, I don't know, it fell into disrepair. It has come back to life. And one of the things it's come back to life with is that there is now a museum downtown, and one wing of it has what in it? The works of William Johnson.
Rightfully so.
He helped to revitalize a town that did not want him, that arrested him at a certain point. So I'm used to thinking of, here are Black people who are prepared to continue on, and it's just ironic that part of the revitalization of the downtown would be on somebody that they had dismissed, and that people now have to recognize that I came from a group of people who understood their power, and they used it. So the oldest school in my hometown is Wilson Senior High School, which was started by the Freedmen's Bureau, and it was open to all people, Black or white. But most people didn't realize. They thought that this other school was the signature school of the town, when here was this Black school, which was the original first school of the city. And there was an attempt to build a new one and move the Black school to a new area of town when schools were desegregated and everything. And Black people fought for it and said, no, we're going to build Wilson in what is a historically Black neighborhood because it's a part of our heritage. And they fought for it, and they made it happen. And that comes from coming together collectively and understanding that you don't have to accept what people just give to you, but that you're willing to work for it and that you understand what power is about.
So at what point did you leave Florence, South Carolina?
Mm-hmm. Well, I knew by fourth grade that I had to leave Florence. I'm serious. I was trying to figure out a way in my mind. I said, because I'd seen, Detroit, and I've seen a different part of the world, passed through Washington, D.C., visited later with relatives in New York City. So I knew by fourth grade, and I knew by fourth grade because of a teacher of mine, my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Gaiman. She was a Fisk University student, had come to Florence to teach there. She was new, she was young, and she was a person who said, just because people give you something doesn't mean that that's all you should have. Okay. And she said, you must, she impressed upon us. And I heard that message from her. And so I started thinking, we were watching television, you're seeing all these people. TV was a great outlet to see what the rest of the world was like, even though I'm living in this clustered type of world. And so I decided, and how I made it out of Florence was because of a program called ABC, A Better Chance. It is a program that attempts, or does actually, at that time, allow Black students an opportunity to go to private schools, private boarding schools.
Oh, wow. And how did you find this opportunity?
I didn't find the opportunity, but I recognized it when it came. And that's something. Sometimes you go out looking for opportunities. Other times, opportunities come your way. You have to recognize when it is there in front of you and grab it. There was a gentleman from Exeter, Phillips Exeter, in New Hampshire. It is probably the premier boarding school in the country.
Phillips Exeter
Academy in Exeter, New Hampshire. One of the oldest boarding schools in the country, started back in the 1700s. And this gentleman came to my school and talked about, the idea of boarding schools and going there and whatever. And after he finished talking, I went up and said, hey, I'm interested.
You just sign yourself up for everything.
And so I said, hey, I'm your guy. Come take me. Because I got to get out of here, right? And what he did was he said, I would love to have you come, but we're actually looking for girls. We're going to be going co-ed, and I'm looking for girls. And he said, but I'll tell some of my colleagues about you. Let them know about you. And they'll get in touch with you. And I thought he just let me down easy, right? I'm going to tell some other people. And 3-4 weeks later, I started getting letters from boarding schools. He actually did.
Wow.
And then I got a letter from ABC. And they invited me to come to Boston and to visit some other boarding schools.
And this is coming up from Florence.
Yeah. So I come up and, visit other schools, see what they're like. And I went to this one school called Governor Dummer Academy.
Say that again?
Governor Dummer. It's Dummer Academy.
Okay.
And it is actually the oldest boarding school in the country. It's the original one. The guys who started Phillips Exeter and Phillips Andover actually went to Governor Dummer. So we like to, to say that, that they weren't first, we were first. But I went to visit the school and stayed there a few days. Had a fantastic time, and I said, this is for me.
And how old were you at that time?
I was 13.
Wow, that's...
Yeah. So I was 13 when I visited. I was 14 by the time I got there because my birthday is in the summer.
That's very powerful to be at such a young age and change the trajectory of your own life. I feel like at two pivotal moments.
It was an important time, and it was an important moment. But the idea was I recognized that this was my opportunity. I was scared as all heck, and that's a nice way of saying it. I was scared.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, it was like this is the first time I've been on a plane before, right? So all the things that you don't know. And so now you're here with all these folk who are talking in strange accents, New England accent, park the car and Harvard Yard. And I'm thinking, what y'all talking about here? What did he say? And they're looking at me the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm about to say. Yeah. Exactly. They had no idea what you were saying.
Right. None at all. But in Florence, though, the school that I went to, Pointer Junior High School, I have to tell you that there was never a day in that place that I ever felt that people welcomed me there. So this makes some of it makes you tougher, but your community makes you tough as well. It strengthens you when I say tough. Was that I was going to a place where I was academically prepared to sit in a room with the white kids and compete, So that wasn't a problem. These black teachers had taught me well. So I had that experience of where somebody was challenging whether you should be there or not. Okay, whether you had the right, whether you had the smarts or whatever else. And all of us, actually. But I did have the right. I was smart enough to be there. And there was nothing that they knew better than I did. And in fact, the idea that some kid is coming in where he lives at a house where, one of my friends' mothers is the servant in that place and works for them, or somebody's a driver or the yard man or whatever else. He was no better, no different than I was. No better, no worse. However, I had the challenges of the other obstacles of being from the wrong side of the tracks, that they're colored. They really, yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's not even just being wrong from wrong side of the tracks. It's the flesh that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the flesh that you're in. But there is that strain. The stuff that we go through in life, there's a saying that, you go through some things, but you're only being prepared for the next thing that happens. And so that inasmuch as I felt a sense of, that there were people there trying to make me feel as though I didn't belong, it built in me that thing that said, I can survive and I can thrive and I can make it through this. So when it came down to making the leap to go to boarding school, that was just a different type of challenge.
And so you were prepared for it.
I was prepared for that. Now, the New England can be brutal. My first coming back to Boston to start school, Eastern Airlines lands their plane at Logan Airport, and those are the days you walked down the stairs onto the tarmac and then went inside. It started to rain, and it was cloudy and foggy. It stayed like that for like 2 weeks. It was like, why am I here? I want to go home. I kept telling myself, okay, today is the day. If you want to go home, all you have to do is you wake up one morning and you say, today is the day you want to go home. You just go over to the headmaster's house because he lived in the mansion house. You just go over and see the headmaster and say, I want to go home. And you can be back home by dinner time because they put you on a flight and you can go.
You're not playing around. You don't want to be here. You don't
Right.
got to be
You
here.
just go, right? And every morning I would wake up and I would say, okay, I don't want to be here, but today's not the day that I'm going to say it. And so I kept telling myself that day in and day out until I got to a few days where I didn't ask myself that question. And then I learned how, to say, I came here for a purpose and I'm going to do that. That was the challenge piece of it. And it challenged in such a way that I joined everything. I ended up being, co-captain of the track team, winter and spring. I became class president, school president. I got involved. I, moved on to being doing volunteer service at the Danvers mental health school.
So, being so involved, but being in New England now, right, and coming from a community that is predominantly Black or almost all Black, was it a challenge becoming, making friends with different types of people?
Yeah, it was a challenge, but you make the mindset when you realize that in Newberry Township or county, in that part, we were 5 miles from the New Hampshire border. Okay, that's about as far as you can go, and that the majority of the Black people were in the parish or in that county were on campus with me. So there was just a small. You figure, okay, well, I want a haircut. What about the food? They didn't have that stuff there, So you learn how to build relationships, and some of my friends that I've had for a lifetime, Black and white, went to that school because we were kids.
Yeah,
you make friends and they're there for a lifetime. In fact, I have this June, our 50th reunion is coming up. So,
and you're going back?
Of course, I'm part of. Hey, look, I'm part of the committee setting it up. I'm trying to get other people to come back.
Exciting time,
right?
Exciting time.
Yeah. So, getting to know other types of people is important, and having them get to know you too. It wasn't necessarily easy. Here were these, and I'm not trying to poke fun at anybody, but here were these little white boys who some of them, had not seen Black people, or their relationships with Black people was from afar, or those people worked for them. And they were wealthy. I thought, South Carolina, when I saw people who we called rich, weren't really rich.
Damn.
Okay? These people were rich.
See that New England wealth.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they were wealthy. I can recall at dinner one night saying we had some girls who had come to the school. They were day school students, and we had been away for vacation, for a break. And she overheard me mention Florence, and she said, "Oh, I love Florence." I love Florence. It's just beautiful. And so she was talking about Florence, and she said, and I love those canals. And no, we're not talking about the same Florence, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not talking about the same Florence. So there were moments like that where somebody, my mother's sister worked at Saks Fifth Avenue in New York City, and as a Christmas gift, she gave me 2 ties. They were beautiful artistic ties. They had been done by the artist or the designer or whatever they call those people who do great clothing. His name was Emilio Pucci. And she gave me 2 ties by Emilio Pucci. I go back and I'm wearing one of my ties because we had coats and ties at school. And this guy named Emilio said to me, he recognized the tie and he said, "That tie is great. Can I have it?" And I said, "No, it was a gift." He said, well, he kept bothering me. He wanted to have the tie. And then finally said, "Well, what could I give you?" And so I jokingly said, "A free trip home." A free trip home. And that's exactly what he gave me for that tie.
Boy.
Because his name was Emilio. The tie had Emilio on it. And he wanted it. Now, my aunt had given me 2 ties, so I could certainly give away one of them. And I got a round trip ticket home.
Listen, I've never seen a tie more useful.
Yeah. But the idea was, this is a different world.
Yeah. So I could a trip home.
Yeah. One friend who my aunt lived in the Bronx and the Mott Haven area. That's where the Major Deegan comes around. The South Bronx. It's about as south in the Bronx as you can get, right? And so for Thanksgiving, because I wasn't going home, I would go to New York City and have Thanksgiving there because I couldn't afford to go, that trip and the money and everything else. And one of my friends said, "Well, listen, I live in New York. I can give you a ride home." So on the day just before Thanksgiving, I get back to the dorm, and he said, "You ready to go?" And I said, "Well, where's your mom?" Because I was expecting his mother to come with a station wagon with wood on the side. He said, "No, the car's outside." It was a chauffeur. And so he was a chauffeur. He was going to drive us, drive him into Manhattan and drop me off in the Bronx. And so we wanted to go try out this McDonald's place. And so the chauffeur pulls up to McDonald's and he said, what would you like me to get? And we wanted to go inside because McDonald's was a big deal. I hadn't been in one before. Mm-hmm. So we go inside the McDonald's, the chauffeur's with us. We order the food and people are staring at us too. I didn't realize that. And we decided we're going to eat and keep driving in the car. So we get back into the limousine and we drive on to the Bronx. And my uncle was looking out the window to see when we were going to arrive, right? And so we pull up in this long black limousine and the chauffeur gets out and Chris gets out and the chauffeur, and I'm like, okay, just let me take my bag. I'm going to go on inside. All the neighbors are looking and everything else. And the chauffeur's like, oh, no. They came with me into the building. The chauffeur carrying my bag, he's all dressed in black. And it's just, my family still kids me about that, but it's still one of those things where it was a memory.
Yeah.
But it's a different world because I wasn't embarrassed about him coming to see where my family lived. So what? You all live in some penthouse in Midtown Manhattan. You are who you are. I'm comfortable with who I am.
And I think you being comfortable in who you are, as you said before, is reflective of the people that you had to look up to, right? And I can see how, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you carry yourself in a demeanor that is worthy of being a role model to a lot of people. I mean, it's somebody that I have a lot of respect for personally.
Well, thank you.
And I can see like the different roles that you play and how they can inspire people to advocate and bring about change. And there's different avenues that they can go about to bring about change on top of that.
Right.
But like looking at society now and how with social media, and I feel like there's this heavy notion put on for people to individualize themselves and find out how they're different than everybody else. How are you unique? And this lack of regard and the importance of community and being of service to each other, right? What do you think is something that you can do or somebody can do or we can be doing as a community to bring that back?
Yeah. You know, service is something that's important, I feel. And you've heard that old saying about, well, service is the rent we pay for being here, right? You must be of service to yourself, because if you're not, then you're no good to anybody else, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You must be of service to your family, because those are some of the people who are closest around you. And you should be of service to your community, because you want to make the world better than what you found it to be. And then I think finding other people who are like-minded about that. Sometimes people want to find, they want to build a tent so large that it includes everybody. And then there's some people in there who don't want to do the work. Well, if it's just two of you, then the two of you work on it. If it's 5, then the 5 of you do. If it's, if it's 100, then the 100 does that. Because the success that you have will eventually bring other people to the table to help do the work. Sometimes people don't do the work because it's so busy trying to build a huge organization that includes everything, that instead of just doing some of the work that matters right then and there, the pastor of my church 20 years ago, there was a big snowstorm in Stanford. It was about to come. And so people didn't show up at church that day. But I was there because I was the audiovisual man. Right? And the fellow that played the piano was there, and another person came in, an usher. There were no more than 5 or 6 of us there. The pastor came out and he delivered the sermon. We didn't have all the music and all the other stuff that goes with it, but he delivered the sermon just like he would have on any other Sunday. And that particular word that was spread to everybody else about, we had a good time. And the church continued on, and we prayed for everybody and all the other stuff. Well, you go with what you got. And service, again, is so important on how do you make it different. I try to teach that to my daughters and my son, and to say, okay, what have you done for somebody else? And that's part of a legacy of what I've lived through with the people who poured that into me. So why wouldn't I want to pour that out to other people, to say you can make the world better? All it takes is one person. We had here in Stanford a woman who ran for office against a seasoned politician. She won by 1 vote. But that 1 vote is going to make a difference because she's in office now, and she gets to promote some of those ideas that bring people together, whereas the person who was in that seat before wasn't necessarily doing that. 1 vote. So she raised her hand, and she got out there, and she did the work. I think that it's important to make sure that we have people who look like you and me in the room. Because if we're not in the room, then we don't get a say on it. Could you imagine? There are people who say, well, we shouldn't be voting, especially young black people, young black males. That's becoming a thing of they're all the same and we shouldn't be bothered on voting. And I look at it and I say, well, if you were a rapper and you were with Jay-Z and Kanye and all those other people, and they put their arms around you and said, we're going to make some money, we're going to do all this other stuff. But when it came time to talk about the money, they said, well, you don't need to come to the table. We got this. You don't need to come to the table here. Okay? Well, this is just like with this country. We're all together. When the voting happens and the selection happens and the decisions happen, there's some people telling specifically young black males, you don't need to be in there. So you don't know what's going on in there, and they're making decisions about how to split the money up. Our country, $20 trillion, and an economy of $20 trillion, and $4 trillion of it spent on the budget of how things get paid for and who gets what. And you don't need to be there. Now, that's just for the federal government, but we're doing that all over the country. So you need to be there because other people get to decide. So being in the room is important, and part of that is service. And that service is not only for civic reasons, but it's also service in the religious or within faith. Because as I started out by telling you, I learned the idea of service through my faith and through my church from people who believed that those two things of the sweet by and by and the here and now were intertwined with one another. I can't tell you to wait, for heaven to come and you'll get your reward when somebody's kicking your ass down here. We can do something about that.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I want to touch on is because I do want to mention this and give you a moment to speak on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're now a member of the Board of Ed. You were a teacher before, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the work that you have done in Stanford can be considered to be done through Chester Addison. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Chester Addison is near and dear to my heart.
So can you tell us, those that don't know what Chester Addison is and what your role was there?
Yeah. Well, Chester Addison, as I knew it and as most people know it, the one that I'm speaking of, is no more.
Yes, you're right.
And that's unfortunate. But it was about community in Stanford. And as I mentioned to you before, I was a member of the boys' club, the very first boys' club in my hometown, right? When people were starting it. You had a baseball team and you had some old pool tables that the pool hall down below sent upstairs to us. They were used, battered, but we played on
it. Got y'all together.
We played on it. People brought in old books and they were in the library, right? And that's where it was a copy of Catcher in the Rye, and I read it in there. We had a boxing ring.
Okay. So
that's where people settled their disputes. Okay?
They got to bring that back.
Get your lights punched out. Hey, you mad with somebody? Hey, two bigger boys grab and say, they fighting over here. Yeah. Throw you in the ring and let's go for it.
Jimmy never sat in Charlie's chair again.
Yeah. But that was just that idea of community. The Chester Addison Center was important because we attempted to do some things there, which continues to pay dividends to the Stanford community, not only for the kids who attended there, but also for members of the staff, young staff who were teenagers. This was their first job in many instances, where we wanted to teach them about responsibility. We wanted to teach them about service. We wanted to teach them about caring for other people. But we also wanted to teach them that you're expected to do more. And so there are some of those young staff who were young staff members at that time who are doing more as community center directors, state troopers, school teachers, that they're making a difference. And then so every time I see some of the kids who are in the programs and hear what they're doing now, it warms my heart, because I knew that by putting in that effort and saying to them that we cared. I remember somebody saying to me once, and said, well, you don't have any kids in the Stanford public schools. Why are you here? And I said, I got 167 reasons why I'm here. So a lot of people around town call me Mr. Hyman. And there's a thing about that. I'm okay with being Mr. Hyman. When somebody who is 15 tries to call me Michael, I'm like, no, that don't sound right. Okay? I worked for this mister. Okay? This is about respect, and it's not about trying to put you down or power or anything like that, but it's about the idea that it's a matter of showing, that we recognize that there's some differences, about showing respect for one another, and that to that extent that I owe you the respect of making sure that if you're in a place and a space with me, I'm going to honor your presence by making sure it's a place and a space that allows you to survive and to thrive as a young person. That's my job. Adults should be able to stand up and make that happen. And from the side of being on the Board of Education, my job is to make sure that we create an environment that allows that to happen for young people in our schools. And so you can do some of that through what the policies are like, watching over the system, providing some guidance, and every once in a while throwing a monkey wrench in and saying, we need to look at this a different way. Okay? Because we have a lot of young people who are being hurt. There are obstacles in their way. We often talk about all of the environmental things that cause trouble for young people, where they're from, the bad choices that they make, what their family is like, broken homes and everything else. So we can list all of those things, but we never seem to list the fact that there are adults who work in the system sometimes, not just schools, but systems in general, that help to break young people. And so we should be just as introspective about those systems and providing the support, the training, the guidance, and when necessary, the kick in the ass to that system to say, you're breaking some kids by the actions that you're doing. It's not just a matter that we go out and we say, well, we're going to throw all these supports around kids. We should do that, right? But why are the supports necessary in the first place?
That's an important question.
And sometimes we're causing them.
Yeah. So a couple things I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
One, I think that's the importance of critical race theory and why it needs to be applied in school. Because, like as you said, like there's a difference in we can both show up to school prepared to learn and both have studied the same material, but the external factors and pressures that I'm under in order to perform under are different. So, and not to say if somebody performs under and they perform, they're better or less. No, but they should be acknowledged.
Yeah.
And addressed ideally, And then I think when we don't address that, I feel we deal with even more mental health issues, because then people that aren't okay ask themselves why they aren't, when their reasons are right there, but they're just not as clear.
Yeah. We've always known, or people are have started to acknowledge the fact that little black boys and little black girls are considered to be older than they actually are by authority figures. And because they are, I perceive you to be older. I'm going to treat you that way, right? I'm going to treat you as if you should have known better. And so therefore, I'm going to provide you with a harsher penalty because you should know how to respond to that. And if we know that, but yet we continue to deliver out punishment as opposed to how do we redeem somebody? How do we talk with them? How do we share? How do we allow them to grow? So we immediately put them in that situation where, they can become angry. I mean, I mentioned to you corporal punishment that I had, the kind that I got based on love from my family. And that was not abuse, it was love. But I had corporal punishment at the hands of white people at the school where I attended in South Carolina. Somebody said I had done something. They knew I had never done anything. They accused me of writing on a desk. I'd never written on it. I came from a black school where at the end of the day, you were expected to wipe your desk clean. Everybody cleaned off your desk. They were shiny and perfect for the next day. There wasn't a mark on any desk at North Vista School, right? So now somebody's accusing me of that, and they send me to the principal's office. This person paddles me. Now, that was a physical punishment, but it was also an emotional one, too.
Yeah.
Because I had done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you imagine our kids aren't being, paddled in schools. But I almost think that the emotional damage that's being caused, the abuse that kids sometimes take without people actually having a conversation with them and understanding what's going on, is worse than what I got with a couple of swats on my behind.
I agree, because it's more perverse.
Yeah, it is. And, there are people who don't get it, don't believe in diversity, don't believe in inclusion. They'll mouth all of the things about it, but don't do it.
Yeah. So before I forget what I was going to say before, I was going to say thank you for all the work that you have done in Stanford, and I hope you do see the impact that you have had through the various students that have become workers for you as well, because I've had a supervisor of my own that was a student and worked for you, and definitely has viewed you as a mentor. And we had many conversations from years back, and a lot of different lessons that he specifically learned from you that I learned from him.
Wow.
And it's I think about that a lot, because it's when I think about who he is as a person, I get that very similar vibe of somebody that really wants to support somebody and really will give you the tools to thrive in an environment. So I want to say shout out to him, because I appreciate him a lot. But that's also reflective of the impact that you have, and I hope to have that type of impact someday.
Well, I think that you're already having that impact, Brian. And the young man that you speak of, he was a kid. That was it. He was just a kid in middle school. But when, somebody recognizing you've got it, right? You've got it. You don't have to be anything special or extra. You just have to do what you do, and you have to care. And I try to bring that out, that do what you can where you are. You start there, then you enlarge your circle over and over again. And then there are other people. I have a lot of friends, but I do have 3 really close friends that I've known 45, 50 years or so. And one of the things about it is that I can pick up the phone, to talk to them, and we fall into a conversation like we just saw each other 5 or 10 minutes ago. Everybody needs that type of support of where do you go when you need to talk to somebody who's going to give it to you straight, who's going to not, who's not going to sweeten it up, but they know you enough. you must have friends too. There's a understanding that people actually live longer, and the cutoff, not cutoff, but 3 good friends is usually the barometer for long life and happiness. So if you're 1 short, go get that 3rd friend. If you've got 5, keep them. You're going to be around a long time, or let somebody borrow one of them. But that's important, especially for Black men.
Like, for sure. And so I'm looking forward to getting into the work that hoping to get into when I graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be, I look forward to that.
Yeah. Well, you and I talked about this idea of social work and how it is so important now, and how it is so different from what social workers used to do.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, where they were coming to check people out, check their homes out, and tell the government on them and say, yeah, you got a man in the house, get out of here, and all this other stuff, right? But the social work is about that activism, about saying, wait a second, how do we make somebody's lives better, and the advocacy piece of it. And advocacy is so important that people need to be able to speak up, say something, especially during times like this.
For sure. Yeah. Now, is there anything you would like to say that I didn't give you the opportunity to speak on or share?
Well, I rambled on so much here. I'm sorry about that.
No, I thank you.
You shouldn't have put a microphone in front of me. It was all your fault. It was all your fault.
You can blame me. You don't have to blame Mr. Hyman.
Yeah. Did you notice there's a guy sitting over here? he's been hiding back there, but there's somebody sitting over
I hope you forgot about him.
Okay.
But that's speaking of finding 3 people, that's one of my 3 people.
All right.
So he's good in my book, so you don't got to worry about him.
Okay.
I before we close, I actually want to read this poem. I read this poem before on one of my podcasts, but I feel like it's fitting for the conversation.
Okay.
Goes. They broke your great-grandpa, black boy. They freed his body and told him he couldn't vote. They broke your grandpa, black boy. They gave him the ballot, but kept his civil liberties on the rope. They broke your father, black boy. They set a trap right outside his home. And when you awoke, you were all alone. Black boy, will they break you? And this is something that holds us, where our mission is to bring us closer to our emotions, to not only understand who we are, but who we want to be.